This emptiness just seems to go on and on. There's really just nothing here other than this game cartridge. Curse block convenience. Usually when you think of SNK, one might think of one of the mini fighters that they made in the 90s or early 2000s. And Metal Slug. From the many SNK games there are out there, one that's sure to come to mind is the King of Fighters. Looking at fighting games today, a lot of them are trying to simplify themselves and becoming more beginner friendly, and King of Fighters isn't exactly the easiest fighter to learn. So it makes sense for SNK to make a King of Fighters spin-off that's geared towards beginners by taking what King of Fighters has established and simplifying it in a way that most people would be able to follow. And thus we have
SNK Heroines Tag Team Frenzy.
I guess the question is, does SNK Heroines simplify things for the better? Now when talking about King of Fighters button-wise, you'll mainly use 4 buttons. Those being punch and kick with each having a light and heavy variants. You can also do a dodge roll with both light buttons, and a launch attack with both heavies, plus you can also throw a combined press of either the back or forward directions with one of the heavy attacks at the same time, all of which is important to bring up when talking about the gameplay of SNK Heroines, as it tries to simplify itself. When it comes to attack buttons in SNK Heroines, you get 3. A light, a heavy, and a special button. With these buttons comes the first issue of the controls. With your light and heavy attacks, there's only one variant of those attacks. The light is a 1-2-3 hit combo, with the heavy having a single attack. There are a couple exceptions to this, such as the launch, which is the light's 1-2-3 combo, but pressing the heavy on the 3rd hit, which I might add that the timing of the launch being a little picky. And then there are air attacks. Now with special attacks, you do have different variants, which is determined by the direction you're holding when hitting the special button, or while being in mid-air with some characters. The best comparison I can make would be Smash Brothers when describing this. Speaking of Smash Brothers, how about we talk about the most controversial part of the controls? The block button! Now in any good 2D fighter, you can block by holding back, which will cause your character to automatically block when attacked. Unless, of course, we were to throw lows and overheads into the mix, but since you can't crouch in this game, mix-ups don't exist in this game. Getting back to the block button, the big issue with it is that it really throws off anyone that's played a 2D fighter before. Now what you can also do with this button is that you can do a dodge roll by hitting a direction while blocking or doing a recovery. Not only does it throw off people who are used to playing fighting games, but it also takes something that was already super simple and easy to understand, and just made it more complicated. There is another glaring issue with there being a block button, but I'll get back to that in a minute. What I need to discuss are the rest of the controls, with those being throw, tag, and dream finishes. Now a throw is a throw, and functions just how it should in a fighting game, mostly as a means to get through someone's guard. Although guard breaking is a thing in this game, where you just wail on someone blocking, and their guard will eventually break, which results in them getting stunned. But I must give them props where props are due. They made a throw button, rather than having a combination of inputs that only triggers when you're in someone's face with it, making it much easier to pull off. The tag button allows you to switch between your 2 characters, which I don't think needs explaining, so that brings us to the last button, the dream finishers. Just like special, supers are now mapped to a button as well, with each character getting 2 of them, depending if you're pressing down or not when hitting the button. You might be aware that the game is asking you to use 7 different buttons, versus the 4 that King of Fighters had you use, making this game a bit of a nightmare to learn using an arcade stick. This game is clearly meant for pad players, but I kept running into the same issues even with a pad. With the buttons out of the way, let's focus on how the game functions. The most notable thing is the life bar, with half of it being this sparkly pink stuff, which serves as your special meter, and the other half being a standard green, which is your life. The more you get hurt, the more meter you gain from it. Both of the fighters you'll play as during a fight share the same life bar, but they each have their own special meter. Unlike most fighters, both supers and specials eat up your meter, so you'll need to manage the amount of specials you use if you want to use a super. And you want to use supers. Here's the big kicker with this game. You don't win by beating your opponent down to 0 health, but rather you need to bring your opponent's health into the red and then hit him with a super. Of course, supers can be blocked, so typically you want to combo into a super, which is where the simplified attacks become an issue. All you have is a 1-2-3 combo, and a heavy that doesn't combo into are out of the combo. If you actually want to do combos, you'll need to use specials, but if you use specials, you won't have enough meter to throw out a super. Yes, you can switch out characters when you're ready to do a super, but I still feel that's rather unnecessary to do such a mundane thing. So here's how you're going to combo into all of your supers. You're going to do a 1-2-3 combo, but perform a launch in place of your third weak, and then catch him with a super. You're basically going to do this to win nearly every fight in the game. And it's kinda boring to do the same combo over and over again. Think about other beginner-friendly fighters out there. Sure, nearly all of them are very automated with their combos, but those games still allow you to perform different kinds of combos with either your specials, or going into another auto combo before ending the auto combo you were already performing. It makes it feel like a chore, and it lacks any sort of expression when it comes to the combos in this game. And yes, you can still use specials and still have enough for a super. But since your specials are tied to the same meter as your supers, and your supers being required, it really discourages the player from using specials, and the casual player isn't going to be willing to teach themselves to properly conserve their specials efficiently. And if they're getting bored of doing the same stuff over and over again, they'll most likely get turned off by the game's mechanics, which defeats the whole purpose of the game. I should also mention, if you completely drain your opponent's health, you can stun them pretty easily, which opens them up for a super. But is that any better? The game also tries to remedy this a little by adding items into the mix, which can range from damaging your opponent to refilling life and meter to EX specials. You can get items from attacking these yellow orbs that appear on the battlefield. Also, you use items by flicking the right stick on the controller, which you can't remap for some reason. The game also adds another layer of approachive and defensive options by including something new to the King of Fighters series, and this new feature is air dashing. Air dashing allows for a lot more air movements, but there really isn't a lot you can do mid-air, since you only get a light, heavy, and depending on the character, a special. Although it'd be silly for me to not mention air grabs, which I'm not sure why they're in the game. Air dashing is typically something you would find in an anime fighter, and along with air dashing, anime fighters allow you to block in mid-air. Seeing how the tutorial made no mention of blocking in mid-air, I'm to assume it doesn't exist. So if you can't block in mid-air, it can't be used to get through someone's guard while in the air. Of course, getting through a block isn't the only use of air throws. Air throws can also be used to spike an opponent down to the ground. Air throws in this game do just that. Well, with the characters I tried this with, it also brings you down with the opponent. And due to the lack of combo options, there's not a whole lot you can really do with air throws. Overall, on the subject of air mechanics, I feel that air dashing and air throws was an attempt to create something new that's similar to King of Fighters, in order to set it apart and make SNK Heroines its own thing, but didn't know how to really flesh it out within the limitations of the game's controls. It's a real shame since the air dashing feels really nice to do in this game. When talking about the gameplay as a whole, it really lacks substance, while also a little convoluted by having way too many buttons to work with for a fighter that doesn't have that much in terms of controls. With the gameplay out of the way, why not talk about some of the game's features? The first I can probably talk about is the game's online, because it's pretty dead on the Switch version. I was only able to find just one person online, and this was before the Nintendo Online service kicked in, so I wouldn't expect anyone to be playing online now. The one match I had was kinda laggy, but since it was just the one person I fought against, it's a little hard to judge the game's online fairly, since it could have just been a bad connection on either my or their end. With every fight you do in SNK Heroines, you'll receive in-game money, and I'm pretty sure the amount depends on what mode you're playing and if you win or lose, but I'm not 100% certain. Anyway, the money you earn from playing can be spent on numerous different things within the game. Probably the thing you'll spend the most money on are the costumes and accessories to dress your character in. I think it's a little silly that you have to buy a character's normal outfit from the King of Fighter games, but the game gives you enough money to buy those outfits for 2 characters upon starting the game up for the first time, which is really nice since you're playing as 2 different characters in each fight. The money can also be used to purchase poses and backgrounds. These can be used to take pictures of the characters or whatever, and I'm not sure how I feel about that. The game does offer a lot of different backdrops and options to pose your character with, and you can take pictures and set them as your avatar, which is honestly pretty cool. You can also use the money to unlock cutscenes and such from the story mode, which you're also able to unlock without spending money if you prefer. But if you're going to unlock all of them, do you really want to unlock all of them through doing the story mode? I guess while on the topic of story mode, I should talk about that. Story mode is simply the arcade mode of the game, where you fight off against different characters until reaching the boss, who is surprisingly underwhelming for an SNK boss. The plot of the game is about this character named Kukuri, who imprisons a bunch of girls in his pocket dimension, and forces them to fight each other to get more powerful, I think. Also, he turns Terry into a girl. Kukuri is a newcomer from the latest King of Fighters game, which funnily enough, both of his teammates are playable in this game. I find it a little odd for him to be made out to be this perverted character in this game, seeing how he was in King of Fighters 14, with him being super serious and having a really foul mouth. The only instance I could really find in King of Fighters 14 was his victory quote against Angel, which oddly enough is not in this game. The story really doesn't hold any depth, and it just feels really silly overall. But to be fair, is anyone really expecting an amazing plot from a game like SNK Heroines? It serves its purpose as an arcade mode, while trying to give a reason as to why the characters are in revealing outfits. Or you can just be like me and pick the original outfits every single time and have the plot make no sense whatsoever. Now this is where I would end the video, but while writing the script I decided to play the game again, just to keep it fresh in my mind or to double check a couple things. When booting up the game, it notified me that the game now has a control setup for arcade sticks. So I figured I'd give my thoughts on it, especially since I wasn't a fan of the default controls. One thing I must point out is how the arcade stick controls now use 6 buttons instead of 7. You'll still have a button for block, light, heavy, specials, and supers, but the 6th button is used for items, since arcade sticks don't have a right stick that you can flick. So the question is, what happened to the throw and tag buttons? Both of these actions are now done with a button combination using the block button. Block and light will do a throw, while block and heavy is a tag. And I really like this newer setup since I don't have to stop and think where a button was, and I've noticed that my performance in the game has improved by quite a bit with this new control setup. It really fixes the control issues I had with the game, and honestly makes the game so much more enjoyable. Overall, I don't think the game is really that good. Sure, the new control setup makes it much better, but this is something that had to be added through an update since the vanilla version was very anti-stick user, which is a pretty bad oversight to have when making a fighting game, unless you're Smash Brothers, but that's a different story. It oversimplifies itself in terms of functionality, but overcomplicates itself with an unnecessary amount of buttons. The fan service can also be a bit of a turn-off to some players, although you are able to dress your characters in less revealing outfits. It's not for the casuals, it's not really for fighting game fans in general, and because of that I find it really difficult to recommend this game to anyone. And I know that someone might say that it could be for people that are really into fan servicey kind of games, but I would disagree. As an example, I'll take Dead or Alive, which is typically known for its fan service, so much so that people got upset when the latest entry got shown off at E3 with toning itself down. It's still having an overall positive reception, and that really comes down to the game. You can have fan service in your game to grab someone's attention and all, but what's going to make people stay and keep playing the game is the game itself. And Dead or Alive is able to offer a solid 3D fighting experience. That's the kind of problem that really hits with SNK Heroines. The gameplay just isn't very good, and we can already see a decrease in the online user base with the Switch version, so it's very clear that the game has a very limited appeal. If you really have to play this game, I highly recommend waiting for a price drop. Although let's be real, probably the biggest problem in this game is the fact that they didn't include Miss X, which is such a huge missed opportunity. Very odd for this game to be sitting here, especially with this oddly placed fork. Oh no, it's a jump scare Pop-Tart from that horror movie called
Name redacted due to copyright.
Wow, it sure was a good thing I just happened to find this fork on the ground. Come to think of it, where did this fork, let alone the Pop-Tart and the toaster, come from? Now that I thought about it, there's a bunch of kitchen utensils placed everywhere.